An action-packed hour, and actually our sponsor was in studio. We want to thank our sponsor, Guaranteed Rate Mortgage Company. For all your mortgage needs, give branch manager Cora Holbrook a call at area code 781-342-0252. Guaranteed Mortgage is located at 75 State Street in downtown Boston, Mass. Guaranteed Mortgage Company, guaranteed to exceed your expectations.
You know, I also want to thank her because whenever she's come bearing gifts, usually coffee and donuts. I said, girl, you know, you're bringing donuts around a former cop. You know,
listen.
Hey, come on. Yeah. You know, we're gonna go through those real quickly.
But now I know, Pastor Haas, why Dr. Bradley said I'll be more than happy to give up my seat. Give up for the next hour. Right?
Oh yeah.
Brother, you hold it down, brother. You hold it down. I'll put it down.
You got me.
He's like, no, I got it. No. Okay, see,
he got me.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even have to turn that bright light up to get a confession.
You caught me. I knew she was coming. When you said Cora, I was like, oh, really?
No, I don't mind giving up my seat.
Me too.
And she always takes care of it.
Come back for the break.
No, he said, oh, that's too.
You got more coming? I have my seat.
I'm going to take the next hour off. You know?
I'm a gentleman, man.
So I can catch up.
I have to take one for the team,
Oh, man. But like I said, I want to thank all our guests. That was very informative, folks. And if you they're still in studio, but I mean, if you have any follow-up questions, you can give us a call here. We'll take your information. We'll pass it along to them. I mean, these experts were just fantastic with the information. I mean, it's a lot, you know, with an hour, but I think they did an excellent job.
Yeah.
And
well, I have to admit that I was not listening. Okay. Wow! I was too busy chewing. But I can assume, I can understand because with the uptick in the interest rates by a quarter, so that is going to be more expensive.
Yes.
You know, so it was definitely timely to have them in. You know, and that was a very good move. Yeah. But whenever Cora comes in, Doc,
it's timely. You know something else? I really wasn't listening. But you did a good job.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Man.
Thanks for holding down the phone.
I tell you.
Okay, let me cut it out.
No, listen. That's the truth.
It's all in fun.
The truth will set you free.
Well, I didn't have a chance to eat breakfast, man.
Now you have something that you do with that new treadmill you said, right?
Yeah. Right. I can work it off. I can work it off.
Pastor Hobbs, I'm almost speechless. You know, no wonder he sat off to the side too, right? So I couldn't see.
There's a lot of chairs. You know, you need some chairs. You need some chairs, Doc. Even the studio's too small.
Right. When he went out to the green room out there, you know, he stood up to the side. So couldn't see how many times he went back to the left.
We have cameras out there, do you? You see me stuffing my face.
What's that in your pocket?
For the
ride home. Listen, believe it or not, you are listening to At the Round Table.
That's a sausage, egg, and cheese croissant, Doc.
617-282-0685 if you want to put in your breakfast order. 617-282-0685.
Let me see. Okay, let's get started.
Yeah, right. I don't know how we come back from that. Oh my goodness! You know, so we're talking about the school system earlier. We're going to talk about that, but you know what's interesting, Dr. Bradley, is this week, and not even just here, but at the national level, that what they're passing laws, to about how your hair law. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I saw that.
That you can't be discriminated against for the way you wear your hair.
Yeah.
Now, doesn't that really say something about how we haven't really grown? That here we are in 2022.
It actually speaks back to what I talked about earlier this morning about the history, and these are the legacies of that particular doctrine. Where every feature, of black people are publicly repudiated, but on the other side of that ledger, they do everything to get from the lips to the hips of black people. You know what I mean? So on one side of the ledger, you hate it, you deplore it. You know, on the other side of the ledger, you want to actually for sexual appearance and beauty, you want those features. You want bigger hips and bigger lips and tan and all those things. So you have to kind of look at how America could be really contradictory.
Hypocritical?
Well, I didn't want to use that, but that's a good word as it relates to how they react to people of color, in particular Black Americans. So that's the reality.
Also, it just again shows that they'll deal with symbolic things that really don't cost them anything to change, really to do, right? Mm-hmm. And that if somebody violates, okay, so what? But on the real issues where we need help, like having our experts that we're in here about the housing situation and the gentrification, the lack of education, where really, you want to see a push because you see that they're going all out of their way to make sure that we don't have a right to vote, right?
Well, speaking of that, I'm going to kind of detour just slightly on that conversation because the gentrification and around housing and the affordability of housing, the lack thereof for people of color. My theory is that you're going to see a change in the quality of education in school in the Boston public school system.
You think so?
This is where I'm going with it. Yeah, I think so. I think what happens is that when you have that gentrification, you have a higher level of social status come in. This is just a theory that I have, and with that, you have more taxes. You have higher. You have people who are holding leadership accountable. And so when you get that, you're going to get a quality of education, a quality of services right across the board. So when you have individuals coming in, they're paying, $3-4 million for 200 or 300 feet of living space. With that come higher taxes. With that come a greater responsibility. And so with that, we come people that's going to be a little bit more vigilant over what you're doing and how well you're doing it in government.
No, you're right, because our previous guests were, when she was quoting some figures, like she said, the affordable for a 2-bedroom condominium in Boston, and this is if the city helps you out, is $240,000, right? So that's triple that if you're not in one of these programs. So that goes to your point that if I'm paying $600,000 for a 2-bedroom condominium in Boston, I'm not going to want to be paying for private schools. So I'm going to make sure I'm invested in.
So if I'm coming in, for instance, we have an apartment and a 3-bedroom apartment, a 3-bedroom. I need 3 bedrooms because I have children. If I have children, then I need to send them education. I'm not going to send them to Catholic Memorial when I'm paying $1.5 million for this apartment. I want to send them to a public school system that's going to be sufficient and efficient as it relates to educating my kids. So effective, I mean. So I'm really going to actually put pressure on leadership to make sure that we deal with the recalcitrants in that particular school system to better that education. So I think as you see a complete shift as it relates to the demographics of folks who are living in Boston because they have been priced out, you're going to see a change in the quality of services right across the suite. School, safety, code enforcement, all that's going to change. That's a sad commentary, but that's the that's what has been played out throughout society.
It's interesting what you're saying, and it almost kind of leads to people believing maybe this is part of the movement of the new superintendent pushing out, is that things want to be headed in a different direction because of what you're talking about, is that you see the change in the economic status and folks moving in the neighborhood saying, look, I'm paying all this money for the X. I don't want to see. I think not just for education, but also in crime and other things that we're seeing that we've seen neglected in certain neighborhoods. We're going to start to see a trend. And I give you a good example of that is that you see that. But this is why I actually admire the folks in the North End, right? When yesterday the mayor and them said it's going to be $7,500 and then all these additional fees, they rallied together. They came together and said, you're discriminating against us.
Because it's our culture. This is what we do. This is how we celebrate each other. This is how we actually create those social bonds by coming out around food and so on and so forth. unfortunately, in our community, we really don't see that. You know, I say that unfortunately because that's the way you actually hold the authorities together, you know, to task to make sure that things are done correctly to represent your community. So, but Boston is not. This is not a new phenomenon. You know, this is not anything that's coming out of the sky that people, you know, this is, you know, people look at it as new. San Francisco would be a good example. Look at the quality of education and look at the living required, the housing in San Francisco. How much does it cost to rent or buy a house? But then look at the quality of services, you know, as it relates to school education, education, policing, and other governmental services, as opposed to what it was like prior to that push, as it relates to the housing. So usually when you see this change in the urban environment, you know, that gentrification brings in a whole lot of different quality of services. That is sad, because what that's saying to you is that we are underestimated, undervalued, and marginalized as a people. We don't really care about our services. But on the other side of this, and this goes back to what the young man spoke about earlier who had the show, politicians don't pay attention to broke, powerless people.
Right.
But they really don't pay attention.
But that's
to
why I
those
asked, I
individuals.
guess, on our housing segment there, one was from Chicago, one was New Jersey, and I said in neighborhoods where we're kind of neglected, are you seeing that shift in development? Because like I said earlier, you can't build more land. You can build houses, but you can't build more land. And you're starting to see maybe a turnaround in services and schools in particular, because that is a real reason why a lot of people have left Boston during busing and all that, because education, right? They moved out to suburban, but they realized that gas is $4 and some change a gallon, and it's not going down anytime soon. We've seen these peaks and valleys, but the big reason for the migration out of the city was the education, right? And even folks that look like us who could, realizing that things weren't going to turn around. The only way we can give our kids an opportunity was to find a system that had a better education. It was going to cost us a little more, but the trade-off was such that. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you think Boston is going to turn around, and now you're going to see a school system and services delivered in a way that they should have been.
Yes, I do. I do that, and I think it's going to flip. I think as people of color, because of the way I'm going back to this exclusionary doctrine, the way that America is structured, the way that the policies are written, the way that public doctrines are created, by which and through those public doctrines you create policies, social policies. What you're going to see is a shift in the quality of education, a flip. It's going to be highly valued in the urban areas where the most prosperous and the richest individuals are living. Unfortunately, they don't look a lot like us. And you're going to see a poor education in the suburban areas where those poor inner city people have been pushed out, and now they're residing in the surrounding suburbs. That quality of education is going to decrease because you're going to have people fighting for, fighting in the schools. So, Randolph would be a good example of that, of what I see. Randolph is a good example. At one point, Randolph school system was a part of the METCO program. It's no longer, because the quality of education they see it. Has gone. It's interesting.
I remember, being a young person. If you're a person of color and you had been able to purchase a home or rent in Brockton and Randolph, it's like you had made it.
Yeah. Not now. I mean, because what happened is, prior to the black flight to Randolph, it was predominantly Jewish. And the quality of education was, and I'm not saying that Randolph Public Schools is not a good school system. I'm saying that Randolph Public Schools, like other school systems surrounding Boston, are having these problems because there's this whole idea of using our public school system as a lower tier education that is being pushed out to the suburbs, and then you bring in these these charter schools, and that's a second tier education. That's a higher education as it relates to quality of education, because you don't have the problems, you don't have the social issues. And I go right back to the Maslow hierarchy. I got to have my physiological needs taken care of, and then my safety and security needs can be met. But I can't move to safety and security if I don't have physiological. You know.
So why do you think you're listening to At the Round Table with Man Leo? 617-282-0685. 617-282-0685. I'm Larry Ellison, along with my co-host, my brother, Dr. Bradley. The doctor is in the house, and he is really giving you a checkup from the neck up this morning, right? So, doctor, I guess, why do you think that the requirements that you just described, because we pay taxes here in Boston, people pay taxes in Boston, of parents, like if your child is in the medical system, there is certain strict rules and engagement that you must participate in order for your child to stay in that system. And granted, it's outside, but why did you think that Boston in schools that are not performing, right? Rhode Island has the same problem with their school systems. Like when I look at properties down there from an investment standpoint, and then I look at their school systems, everything is like C, F, and I'm like, well, if I'm an investor and I'm trying to attract people who are going to be long-term, whatever, I would be looking at the school system. And if the school system is an F, then I have to question who wants to. I understand people have to live somewhere, and I'm not stereotyping, but I'm like, if you want to bring your children into that school system and to live there, maybe because you have no other choice, but I'm not sure that we're the right fit.
And then again, this is another theory of mine, is that one of the bigger vehicles for gentrification that ushers in gentrification is safety and security and education. If I'm in a situation where I own a home, we'll say in the city of Boston, and my quality of education is poor, the safety and security is poor, then I'm more apt to sell that property and move to a place where it's better, because I need those things not only for myself, but also for my offsprings. So now I'm going to sell my property to someone like us who can actually invest and build a better piece of property and then sell it off, and you bring in a person of higher social status, and then that begins to change the quality of services. So what I'm basically saying is that it's calculated, in my opinion, to have those particular areas of services poor, because that ushers in and it facilitates gentrification.
Right. But you're right. But here's the thing: is that you said before, and I said in the previous hour, what you're paying for one unit now, you could buy the whole street, right? So that demand for better services is definitely, I'm starting to see it. That's why I think that's part of the replacement of the superintendent. I think that's part of why the state is now getting more serious about coming in receivership, taking over, being more involved in the system to attract a certain segment, saying we're going to repair this problem, right? Because I mean, like I said, Dr. Bradley, a $1.3 billion budget, as you said, that is the larger than some gross national products of some countries.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that they don't spend that on their whole country. We're spending it on our education, and the number of students has declined considerably. But if I'm sitting in a think tank someplace and I'm trying to figure out how to usher in or implement my racist views in such a way that it soothes my conscience, then economics will be an easy vehicle to implement those views, because it's not because I'm racist, it's because you can't afford it. You see it? Yeah.
So if I start, attacking those areas of services that and making sure those services are subpar, then you move into other areas. Now that property is vacant. So I think everything is done for a reason. I think everything is calculated. That's how I'm suspicious of it, and I might be wrong. But if I look at it from my position as an educator, I'm saying to myself, there's no reason why I should have the problems in Boston with a $1.8 billion budget.
Right.
But
I think you're also a historian, and when you're talking, I'm thinking about the South End, right?
Yep.
Right. It was predominantly a black.
Yep.
Right. And you can't even get into.
You think you're in Paris if you go down there during the evening with all these outdoor eateries.
But you can't afford to buy down there.
No, you can't, because I came from Augusta, Georgia. My family came up from Augusta in 1967. And so 67, I was 11 years old. And I can remember in 68, 69, 70, I would not drive a Sherman tank down Columbus Avenue because I would rip it apart with the potholes and and depressions and all that stuff that were in the railroads and the rail ties coming out of the road.
Right.
It was actually poorly kept. And then around 82, 83, you got a situation where it was this demographic shift. And that demographic shift came through, and you had people with high social status, high money, more money, buying up those brownstones that were selling for $8,000 in the 60s.
Yeah.
Now they're going for 3, 4, 15, in some cases 15 million.
Yes.
So you can't even begin to look at that area for a residential area. If you're not making somewhere, in the $1 million club, you're not in the $1 million club. So that's a good example of how gentrification can change the quality of services in a city.
But also to that point, like I said, you have me thinking all the time. I think the last foothold that we had that we considered, like I said, that black folks could go and actually in the South End was the Harriet Tubman House, right? And we thought that it was there for a long time. It was like that last hold on. And when I went by there, it's been a while now, but it's been torn down, and now it's going to be high-end condominiums on the corner of Tremont and Mass Ave. That spoke volumes that we didn't fight to keep at least the last foothold that we had.
You don't see it in the South End, do you?
It's
the North End?
No.
You don't see it in East Boston, right?
Right.
Because those brothers and sisters out there, and I have to give it to them, they're protecting their culture.
Yeah.
They was like, no, you're not bringing it here.
Right.
But we tend to feel like, well, I got to move away. It's not. But again, this is the legacy of the doctrine that I just introduced you to.
No, because when you say that, I like I said, that was the one place that you could go if you're a black person to that building in the South End, where because you most likely didn't have any friends or family. There's a few families that I know that were there because their family bought back during the times you talked about when nobody wanted to be there, and they kept it in the family. That's the only reason why they're still there, and they're few and far between. But the Harriet Tubman House. That was the place for gathering for black folks in the South End where you could go. That is gone.
Well, I would say within the next 10 years, you will not know most of Roxbury.
No, that's my point.
I went down to Douglas Station, and that was my hangout. Spinelli's. Right. I was going to go to Spinelli's and buy this.
He's gonna be calling you. You call it Dudley Station.
You know what I mean? Well, actually, that's what it was. Now it's Nubian Square. Yeah. But I was down in that area. Well, I'm from the old school. I have, in fact, Sadiqa has a meeting. Sadiqa has a meeting today that he wants you to go to. Okay. But I was in that area and not have a clue.
Right.
I mean, I didn't have a clue. Right. I said, "Oh my God!"
Right.
I used to hang out down here when I was a child.
Right.
But my wife and I, we both got lost.
Right. But to that point as well, the bowling building, which is now the headquarters for the school department, was downtown at Court Street. It's now it moved into Roxbury, right? And I tell you, watch certain things that move there, right? That was not for our convenience.
No, it's not.
Right?
No, it's not. Larry, you bring up a point, and the point is, remember the old L line?
Yes.
That whole scenery was blocked for years, until they demolished that. Yeah. And they moved it out to where it's currently located near Northeast. It was Northeastern University that played a very major role in getting that demolished and having the Orange Line moved to where it is. It was a Northeastern University who played a major role in moving the police department from 154 Berkeley to where it is today, because they could sell it to their students who are coming in. Yeah, we're safe. And in fact, at one point, they were trying to claim Boston PD not as Roxbury. Right. They want to include it as South End.
And it's different zip code.
Yeah, and the whole
exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
So, because not Roxbury had that negative connotation that came along with it, so they couldn't sell it to those recruits who were coming in, parents who were coming in to send their kids to school. to at Northeastern, and now Northeastern owns a large part of that block.
Right.
You know, in fact, the old registry building that was at one point contaminated, all of a sudden it has revitalized.
Right. It's now
I don't know what happened.
nice dorms. What happened
Exactly.
is the price tag went up.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're right.
So you have to look at the social issues that are happening, but again, it goes right back to the exclusionary doctrine.
Yeah, I mean, and you think about
For doctrine
the old
exclusion.
police headquarters where we stomped in on Berkeley Street is now it was something else. It was called a jury. It's now the Lowe's Hotel. But I mean, so
It was a hotel.
it still is, but
So-
the name changed. I
Okay.
drove by there yesterday and I
Okay.
saw that it changed names. But I mean, I said, man, I used to work in there. I can't even afford to go in there.
I used to work in there, man, as a dispatcher. In fact, I used to sit at the front desk and watch on the cameras, watch the rats and the birds fight for bread.
Right.
I'm telling you, man. I had one situation where a rat came and got some bread, right? And the bird came down. The rat left, and some other rats came. The bird flew off, and some other birds came. They were having a gang fight over bread, dog.
The Rat Patrol.
The rat patrol.
But I mean, I've said this story on the air and in public as well. You know, we talk when you look at Sergeant Horatio Holman, the first black police officer in the city of Boston, and some say he may be the first or second in the country. Right, going back, his family lived in Beacon Hill. They owned a home in Beacon Hill. I went back and researched the property that they own when they buy it. I think they paid $1,700 for it. It's now, the last sale was $18 million for that home. $18 million. No one wanted to be there.
Imagine if his family still owned it.
That's what I'm talking about. That's a generational wealth.
That's the generational wealth.
Right. We don't even go back to Sergeant Holman. We can go back to the homes that we own, that we've had. I have property in Hyde Park that I bought. When I bought it, I thought I'd never get what I paid for it back. Right now, people want to knock me down to buy it. Right.
Yeah.
I know that sets my daughters up for a very good future. If they want to live in the city, they're in a nice neighborhood. But if they don't,
they can always get rid of it and have some good money. In addition to, I own property at Metropolitan Avenue in Boston. When I left to my first wife, that property is valued astronomical now. It's the land itself.
Right.
You know, so it is what it is, man.
Right.
But we have to understand the value of of legacy money.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying
Traditional
when I
money.
guessed early is that these opportunities, they sound good, but how realistic are they for people to get into them, right? Because one, people have situations with their credit, but also just the opportunity, the access to the capital that you need. Like I said, whenever I see a large developer of color, the only person I see a sign out there is Cruz, because he's the only one that's been able to, and I love that man, because he talks about how his father and them, and he is proud to call himself a black man. He's Cape Verdean, but he understands that when we start saying these little things that separates us, right? Because now it's us against them mentality. Thank God that brother's not bought into that narrative.
Well, see, that narrative has a slavery connection as well. Most things in America, you can trace it right back to slavery. You ever heard of the term meritorious manumission?
No, I'm getting into.
All right, meritorious manumission is a process where it was.
Sounds like something you need a vaccine for.
No, not at all. What it is that it was an encouragement to tell the slave master. It was a process where a slave would be freed if they told the slave master if there was a rebellion brewing among the slaves.
Wow.
So a meritorious manumission was a process where a slave would be actually given freedom, never as free as a white individual, but free enough and could never be re-enslaved if they were actually revealed to the slave master when they were plotting to actually rebel.
That's what Harriet Tubman said. I could have freed more slaves if they only knew they were slaves.
There you go. So what you have is that so it was like 150 to 200 rebellions plotted in America among the slaves. Neither one of them was successful because someone black reported it to the people.
So we still have a modern day version of that, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Where, you know, when people are trying to get together, we're all worst enemy.
Yeah.
You know, so go back. What do you think, if at all, we can, like you said, you see the schools changing because of the landscape of people in the community that are going to need it. It's changing, and I don't disagree with that. So I guess my question is, how do we make sure that we are included in that, because you're right. We've seen the gentrification, and it continues. A lot of people who can't afford to live in Boston have moved out. But guess what? They're being pushed out even further, because places that used to be affordable, Randolph, Brockton, you sure can't go to Somerville. You sure can't go over the bridge to Cambridge.
No, you can't.
Right? Unless you're the former mayor and they give you a little sweetheart deal over there, right? What comes with housing. And even places like Chelsea, right? I mean, Dr. Bradley, I'm telling you, when you go downtown and even just driving on the highway, it's unrecognizable.
I get lost. I've been living in Boston for over 50 years. I get lost. I think the way to do it, Larry, is to do it generationally. I hate to say it that way, but my kids, who are now adults and having my grandkids, are in a better position than me and my siblings were.
Here's the problem. Here's the problem. Just like I have, right, is that because our kids are not growing up in the inner city, it's not something they're comfortable with. It's not so will they want to migrate back here? Like we have a dual, right? We grew up in it. We know it. We can survive in it. And we've seen things that we've tried to shelter our families from, right? So they're not saying naive, but that's not what some people see as normal. Our kids don't, fortunately. And I don't say that, with an ego or an arrogance. It's just you don't. That to put them back, that they would even want to come back into that situation is going to be difficult.
Fortunately, my kids stayed. Of my first group of kids. All three of them live in the city of Boston.
But they grew up here.
That's and some of them went to school, and they came back. They came back to Boston. But you have situations where kids are like yours who have never been here.
That's what I'm saying. Unfamiliar with.
And I think that starts with, and you're good at this, brother. Trust me, you and Monique are very good at this. That starts with the educating your kids on their value. You see, our system, the way that it's actually structured, and I go right back to the exclusion doctrine. The way that it's structured is structured to teach us to devalue us so well that we devalue ourselves. We buy into that notion that the ice that's sold by a Caucasian man is cooler than the ice sold by a black man. You know what I mean? We buy into that. And no other culture or people buy into it. So what we need to do is stop it. Among ourselves, and start to value who we are and value the contributions. The other way that they do it is that they'll make it seem like that we are only consumers. We're not originators.
Right.
We're not inventors. But if you start looking at the things that society benefits from, even to this day, the majority of them were created by black people.
Right.
The problem was that black people were owned, so the owner of the black person could take over the invention.
But again, Dr. Wade, how do we go from the moment to the movement? Because, like I said, just think about, even during COVID, all of the unrest in this country, around the world, about the situation for black people, right? And there was symbolism, right? The signs, and the reason why I say that, because the other day I was driving through Nubian Square, and I remember when they had shut down the street to paint that yellow Black Lives Matter right there in the old where Donald Green's office used to be, right there. And I guess the symbolism for me, because it's faded, right? And you can barely see it now, right? You can barely recognize what it says. It was very bright and in a moment. And now there's
no upkeep.
Not the upkeep, but it was symbolic of also our plight and also our movement, of what are we doing, that our determination, our input has faded as well. That was really sad for me. I'm like, wow. I remember when people were out here and they were advocating. You don't see it, and what did we get out of it?
But you can't begin to change your situation when you feel comfortable in the situation.
That's why it's a moment.
That's right. You can't begin to move from a moment to a movement when the moment is good to you.
Then what was it for? Because I think
it's all about play, Doc.
Right.
It's all about it's all about the at that particular time to make me feel good at that time.
Yeah, I mean, people came out and all, but again, our situation has not changed.
No, it hasn't changed.
The infrastructure in these communities, it's changing, and some for the good,
but not for us.
But there's a displacement at the cost, right? no other community, like in certain segments of Boston, you see a few people of color that moved in there, but not where it dominates that neighborhood, where you see this huge seascape, right, change. In black communities, we're seeing a huge change, like the South End. You know, we're seeing that type of change and transformation in there. But I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But what I'm saying, it comes, we're always the ones that pay the price for the displacement, right? It doesn't happen on the other side.
That's right. It's not a bad thing, but it's a thing that excludes certain people.
Right.
You know, and unfortunately, those people look like me and you. And I tell you right now, I tell you to this point, and this is my theory, that you're going to see the same change in Lower Roxbury.
Not
Fort Hill is a good example.
It's Fort Hill has been gone a long time ago. You clearly haven't been down there.
Yeah, I haven't been down there in a while. I haven't been down there in
clearly
12
you haven't,
years.
Because, well, take a ride through the neighborhood.
Yeah, see.
It's not the hood anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Take a ride through.
And that's the problem that we're having in society as relates to, again, being undervalued, marginalized, you know, and people don't really value us.
Because even like, you know, Roxbury Community College, you know, that school has been struggling for years.
Roxbury Community College is HBCU, you know.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's HBCU.
I did not know that. 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685. Our waning minutes here. You're at the round table with Ma'am Neal. You know, we're talking about the education here in the city of Boston. And some would say the lack of education here. I mean, we're seeing the teachers are leaving. I was listening to the superintendent Casellas the other day on one of the local radio stations, and she was saying that because of the shortage of teachers, that they're trying to get the state to pass a law which allows, because, you know, there's a cap if you leave, if you work for the state in the retirement system, you can only make a certain percentage more than your pension. So they're trying to get that waived to at least bring these teachers back, retired teachers that may want to come back and teach. One, you get that experience, but two, to fill that gap. I mean, there's days where there's over 100 people, teachers, who are absent out of the BPS. They don't even have, where they're having to bring people in from the bowling building, the administration, to fill in these classrooms in the city of Boston. Yes.
So you telling me you have classrooms that are not covered?
There's been times when the superintendent has come. She has come in out of her office. So all those people down there, the deputy superintendents, administrators, that have to come in
and teach.
I mean, any warm body to come in. And you know, when a substitute is in there,
it sounds like the school system's in total disarray then.
Well, this is why you see these stories. They're so common now, where the state is, I mean, I think had COVID not come, the state, it actually was a lifeline for the city of Boston in the schools, because you had several of the high schools that were at level 4 meaning that the next level 5 the state would take over. But they had already implemented some changes in those schools because they were performing so badly that if COVID hadn't hit, like Madison Park would most likely be in receivership. Brighton High School would most likely have been in receivership because they're still performing at level 4. At level 4. But I think with COVID gave them a little break because things had shut down. They weren't in person. But now that things are back in place, we're seeing the same underperforming, the same problems. You know, like I said, when you have teachers and staff being shot on school grounds, and I'm not saying it should happen anywhere, but you don't really have a safety plan that addresses this, that we still don't have an understanding between the police department and the schools what the rules of engagement are, and we're almost at the end of the school year.
But and so I would hope that at the end of the school year, and that period between the end of the school year and school reconvening in September, there's some conversation between PD and the school system as to how the PD is going to service and be a supporting entity to the school system.
But that may only happen if you have, because this current superintendent is going to be here for the remainder of the year. So the searches and for the replacement, that's if you have this person installed at that time. And then on the level of priorities, where is that going to be? Is that going to be a priority for the mayor to engage with the public safety piece, because there seems to be a disconnect?
So let me ask this question, Larry. So where's the school committee on this?
Well, they serve.
What role do they play?
Well, that's the problem. That's why there was this on the ballot, and it'd be interesting to see which communities voted higher for having an elected rather than an appointed school committee. So they work for the mayor. So most of the time they're in line with whatever the mayor.
So they selected, the mayor selects them, right?
Yes, they were appointed by the mayor.
Okay.
Only one in the Commonwealth, Dr. Bradley.
Okay.
That doesn't have an elected school is
Okay.
Boston.
Okay, because what tends to happen is that when you have an elected school committee, they are directly accountable to the people.
To the voters.
Yeah, not through the mayor system. When the mayor selects them, they're directly accountable to the mayor, indirectly accountable to the people who selects the mayor.
And to that point, because that was the reason why former Mayor Menino went to the state and said, look, you're holding me accountable, which at the time, it kind of makes you're holding me accountable, but I don't get, the school committee has a lot of power, but I have no control over them. So allow me the power to put them on there and we make the changes. Well, the state gave them that power and it's been a disaster, right?
Well, who funds the school committee?
It's city taxpayers.
So with funds come power. So if the city is actually funding the school committee, and the school committee is not doing, why can't the city use that funding avenue as a vehicle of control,
Right.
or a vehicle of influence over the school committee? They do it all the time in federal government.
Right, but the argument that former Mayor Menino made was that it would make it better for him to get things done and improve the school system by having an appointed school committee that would be accountable to him, right? Because these people who were elected were rebuffing it, and it's been a disaster.
Yeah. I mean, it looks good on paper.
Well, as you said in the article, three members of the school committee have had to resign over racial remarks.
Yeah.
That's the three we covered.
Yeah. So you have someone who's designing, who's actually making racial remarks. These are the individuals responsible for steering our school
but also,
into the future.
In a school system that is predominantly black and brown.
Yeah. So the school committees, I'm playing through this now in my head. The school committee objective is to set the course of action for the school department within the 5, 10, 15-year plans, right? They're not the day-to-day manager of the school.
No.
That's your superintendent and people who on that
They're
side.
the ones who vote on finalizing the person to be the superintendent of the schools by the mayor. They're the ones who, without even looking into her credentials, gave Superintendent Casales a 2-year extension on her contract, and then a few weeks later we find out that her license wasn't even up to par. This is right. So that's
a level of ineptitude by the school committee. Where I'm going here is that you put the Boston public school system at a significant disadvantage in comparison to other schools around the Commonwealth.
But I mean, this.
Okay.
No. I'm gonna let you finish because I think the phrase needs to be not the Boston public school system, but our kids.
All right. Okay.
At a disadvantage.
So you put them at a very distinct disadvantage because you have a school committee that's not accountable to
the public,
right? To the very people who are actually voting,
right?
Kids who are going to school, those kids who are going to school, so to their parents.
Right.
I just don't subscribe to that thought.
That's why no other school system in the Commonwealth has an appointed school committee.
Yeah.
Because they're independents. Because with that appointment, your independence is already bought. It's like if I give you the job and I can take it from you, I'm not independent of you.
So I think one of the things that they did in Randolph that I think would probably be advantageous here was to have a school committee elected by the people, and then have representatives from the town, from the city council, sit on that school committee. By virtue of their responsibility.
No, y'all ain't right.
Eating in your face.
Dr. Bradley Jr. over there. I'm the only one that's not here today.
So I'm watching you laugh. I'm like, what's going on behind me? Something's happening behind me, right? He's over there chewing.
Everybody's had breakfast except me, but
we almost there, brother. We got another few minutes.
I'll have brunch.
I hear you. But I'm saying it. So if you can draw a link between the school committee and the and city government, and who will be reporting to the school committee and working with the school committee
Right.
and coming up with policies that the government will fund, because that will be the representative from the city council that's sitting on that school. So there should be a seat or two on the school committee that is elected by the people.
Right.
City councilmen are elected by the people that are coming together to guide the school system.
Right. Now the school committee has they have a student that's on but the student has no voting. Right.
Well,
Right.
well, that's all semantics.
Exactly.
But I think having someone from the city council or from the mayor's office sitting on the committee would be helpful, though, because it would actually, that person would also be the individual who coming in there with ideas, what the city can tolerate, what the city can fund, how we can move forward. Because the school committee should be the entity that's driving the school, steering the school on its course for strategically
Right.
throughout the future.
But
that's
but
how
I think
see
it goes back what I was saying, that the experiment, that's what like I said with Mayor Menino, was that it was going to be better serve the students by having an appointed school committee. And it's been quite some time that we've been under this, and it's only declined. But yet there's still a pushback, even from both of the at the time candidate Michelle Wu, who's now the current mayor, and her opponent Anissa Sabi George. Neither one of them wanted an elected school committee. Some wanted a hybrid of elected and appointed, because they're trying to make the argument that they need to have this input, but they appoint the superintendent of the schools. That's the school committee really doesn't run the day to day. It's the person that they put in as a superintendent. So
does the superintendent sit on the school committee?
they're at the meetings, but they're not a member of. I don't think they have a seat on there. I don't think
They should have a seat on the
I
school
think
committee.
they're there in attendance, but I'm not sure if they have a seat.
Okay.
But the point is that the person that you put in charge of the day to day, to me, is more important than the school committee. But to have that separation, right, where they're independence from the mayor, because basically whatever the mayor wants is what the school committee wants.
I think it's important when you have that kind of relationship that you have clear lanes of responsibility to identify
And
and define
separation.
and separation. So you can't have a situation where the mayor is in the lane of the school committee, or the school committee members in the lane of the mayor. You have to, and that's very important when you come down to the superintendent as well, because the superintendent is the day-to-day manager. That person has his lines of responsibility got to be well defined,
Right.
and those lines have to be, those safeguards have to be, observed and respected,
Right.
as relates also to the school committee.
Right.
But I think there's a way to work this, but you can't begin to have harmony in the schools themselves when you have so much chaos on the school committee.
But again, you're making my point. Is what I'm saying is that if I'm in disagreement with something that the superintendent of the schools and the mayor, but I'm appointed by the mayor, I'm not going to most likely voice that disagreement, because that means I'm a little. But if I'm elected, I'm not that.
No.
That threat isn't hanging over
Yeah.
my head. That
Yeah, I hear you.
because a lot of the school closings and a lot of the things that have happened, it has been in opposition of what the public wanted.
So you don't have so when you have a school committee that's selected by the mayor, you don't have the autonomy to voice your opinion about the direction where the mayor wants to take the school committee. That's your boss.
Right.
It's not the people.
You
You
know
see?
the number of parents who were not informed and aware of the changes and just the school police that they're and how that was going to operate. They had no clue. Now they're dealing with the fallout, and they're saying, well, the school committee was, because the school committee, like I said, they're going to support whatever the mayor wants. And if that's what the mayor wants, the superintendent is going to support, because they're appointed. So that's why other cities and towns, every other city and town to be exact, have that separation from their town administrator, who's that same acting as a mayor, or their mayor in their town, so that the community, if somebody's not performing in the way they perceive, they have a way of removing them. You can't remove a school committee member, I guess, now, unless they make some racial comments that they get caught saying.
So you asked me earlier the question about what I would do. I think before I would accept a job in this as a superintendent, we got to iron out some differences as it relates to how the school committee is operated, because I see complete chaos,
Right.
and with that, I can't begin to do a job when the school committee, who is responsible for guiding, pushing the organization in the future, is in such total
But see,
disarray.
you would welcome opposing views, and that is healthy. They see it as dissent.
No, agitation is how you clean things off.
Right.
Think about the wash machine. I use Dr. King's analogy. Think about the wash machine. It's that little black agitator
Right.
to actually get the clothes clean.
Right.
You know what I mean? So sometimes, most of the times, what I try to do, I put it this way, just to use constructive criticism as agitating my behavior. As an agitator, so I can improve me. I can, you know what I mean? Because I can't see myself from the outside.
Right.
I got to see myself. I can see myself from the inside only. I have to try to see myself from the outside as much best I can, and people can do that for me.
Because so you're looking at it as a way to try to solve the problem.
Yes.
But see, other people look at it as you're blaming them for the problem.
So let's shift gears for 1 second. I'm on the direct orders to ask you this question.
Okay.
What do you know about Monica Cannon? Is that the individual who's arrested for being
Monica Cannon Grant is she was recently arrested. She was one of the founders of a nonprofit organization that was funded by several nonprofits or groups, and funding also from the DA's office and other funding. So recently in the paper, it's alleged that she and her husband were receiving unemployment funds while they were actually receiving a salary, in which, under the rules of the nonprofit money that they were receiving, they weren't even supposed to be receiving that, and that it's alleged that they also were using that bank account, representing it as their own, in order to get a mortgage for the home that they currently live in now in Taunton, and just using money illegally,
embezzlement.
allegedly. Well, not, I mean, fraudulently, because it was given to them, so they didn't embezzle it per se, but it was fraudulent. So it's wiretapped. I mean, I was reading a 38-page indictment, and it just reads like a novel from some, you think it was fiction. One email in there where the unemployment folks have caught up with her in what she's doing, and she's sending a text message to someone, I believe it was her husband, that they caught up with my blank, and what should she do, and the text that we received back was to fraudulently put together some documents to say that the place was shut down and they weren't receiving. So he hadn't been arraigned yet, but I know there was a raid at their house several months ago in the new home. They had just moved in there, in which they went in and seized a lot of documents and phones and things like that. And then the investigation continued. And then last week, I believe it was, that the indictment came and she was arrested in that home and charged, I think it was like 13 or 18 counts.
So I asked the question because it amazes me how quickly they come after us and don't come after people like the individuals from the January 16th, and how they're treating those January the 6th, how they're treating those individuals with gloved hands, and I'm not saying that she's wrong. She's wrong. Right. You know what I mean? I'm just saying that all throughout our system, and it goes right back to again the exclusion doctrine. Where there's a double standard for us as relates to other folks.
No, there's no question that that is the case in most instances, right? Where other folks get to commit crimes, and like I said, not saying that they should, but that's why I tell folks, people say, hey, don't do what they do. If you're doing something illegal, you shouldn't be doing it to begin with. And the fact that if you're representing it, you're going to be helping people, and particularly those who are the downtrodden, and you're using it for your own personal gains. Especially when I honestly believe that there was a lot of federal money sent to people knowing that they might use it inappropriately, and it's a way to silence some people who they feel have big mouths, right? And I think they said, hey, here you go. Right?
Sometimes, you have to be careful. But I tell folks all the time, we can't do what other folks do.
No, because, someone had got my information and sent in and was trying to get an unemployment claim, and so clearly I knew the fraud was out there, and they sent me a letter, and I was like, no, I'm working, but there are people who will take. I mean, they thought that because of everything that they weren't paying attention at the moment that they wouldn't come back and start revisiting people recover money. We got about a minute, brother. Any closing remarks?
Well, no. Well, actually, I'm trying to get back out there to those donuts.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Time to make the donuts.
time to make the donuts. This was an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
You know, again,
As always.
I try to make sure that I learn about my history, our history.
Should be no mystery.
You know, it should not be his story.
Yeah.
It should be my story.
Right.
It should be our story.
I like that.
Because our story tells us that we are descendants of kings and queens.
Yeah.
Our story tells us that our people have made a huge contribution. We built not only America, but we also built the world.
Yeah.
You know, every country, especially in Europe, benefited from Africa's resources, its precious resources, and its people.
Right.
You know,
See,
so we have to learn that.
This phrase I'm going to coin and put it on a T-shirt. America, be true to yourself so you can be honest with others.
I hear you. I like that.
I do.
All I'm doing, asking you to do what you said you were going to do on paper.
America, be true to what you said on paper. With that said, Dr. Bradley, thank you, sir. Pastor Hobbs, thank you as always. I hope you guys enjoyed your breakfast. Now I'm going to go enjoy mine.
Somewhere I read.
Listen, we got the round table, man. Well, God willing, we'll be back next Saturday.
By the grace of the Lord, you be blessed.
Dreamers, they say I am a dreamer, 'cause I still believe that anything is possible as long as you work hard.
Hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle
So
real
if I never see ya, never get the chance to meet ya, no, I came up from the bottom, always rooting for the
Hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle
I wrote 300 songs in 1 year, Boogie will tell you I'm on it. I got unreleased songs for days, they don't want it. Eat any MC in the game, it ain't a challenge. If your music reflects who you are, then you's a coward. I can see through the lies you ain't living what you spitting. If your money's so long, why your dog's in prison? Why your baby mom's stripping, why your mom's still living in that same broken home that